You're listening to a Very Spatial Podcast, episode 724, October 22nd, 2023.
City lights on summer nights, rose petal lips staring red, and I'm lost in a whirling blur in my head.
Hello, welcome to a Very Spatial Podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
And this is Frank.
And this week we're going to be talking about...
Things in GIS that annoy us.
But first, of course, we have some news. Over the last few episodes, we've been talking about various conversations regarding precision navigation and timing. And we talked about the U.S.'s call for things. We talked about how China is about to roll out a version. And now the UK has put out a 10-point policy framework talking about it that calls for the development of a national timing center that's creating a mod time, an ELRAN component, looking at the SBAS, the satellite-based augmentation system. So since they're no longer part of Galileo, having an SBAS to kind of enhance the existing signals. I don't know which one they'll base it on, or multiple of them. Looking at next gen PNT, which of course is kind of what we were talking about with China last week. Looking at infrastructure resilience, what happens whenever these things might go down. And then looking at 4 policy initiatives, National PNT Office that would be created inside of the Department of Science. Looking at a PNT crisis plan. What do you do whenever the bleep hits the wall? PNT skills, so looking at doctoral programs and other education activities to, enhance the knowledge base in this area, and looking at growth policy. So, kind of a broad technical and policy set of considerations to, what do they do now that this wonderful thing of Galileo wasn't sitting in their backyard anymore.
As well, looking at some of the recent things in the U.S. Related to the President's National Space-Based PNT Advisory Board and some of the R&D plans here in the U.S. as well as kind of things to work with.
To look at as models.
Yes, as models.
For there.
So.
This really feels like one of those things that needs to be a world thing, right? I mean, I applaud that all these countries are in getting engaged in it and addressing the fact that this is important and we need to address it at some level. But I really feel like this would be like a United Nations thing. Let's just have one model worldwide.
There are so many different ways to respond to that besides the I agree that goes along with the Ukraine, Israel. We skipped over the articles that are talking about the massive amount of satellite and especially GNSS jamming that's going on in that portion of the world right now.
So this is something interesting. I got invited to, this is tangentially, but it's right off of what you just said. I got invited to speak on a panel at my institution about the Russian-Ukrainian war and some of the backdrop for it and why it's there and how that happened.
Pull the IR ticket out of your back pocket for
I did. I pulled that out, but I actually did pull out a lot of geography too, because what a lot of people don't realize is the topography in that region is directly relates to the historical evolution of that region. I mean, because basically you can drive through there without any problems. It's about as flat and easy to get through as anywhere on the planet, it feels like. So it's an easy space to, particularly when you got tanks to go through. So tangent there. But I did look up because I was kind of curious exactly how much Russia was blocking GLONASS. How much?
Well, you're not wrong with the other.
I did. Yeah, you're right. But how much they were blocking that? And I found out actually not that much. And the reason is because of the existence of all these systems. So to completely counter what I just said, the fact that there is GPS and so many of the weapons that Ukraine is using are basically designed to work with GPS because they're being given by you're given U.S. munitions to fight some of this stuff. So they don't really even bother to block it that much, which I thought was kind of interesting.
So they may be, we should probably look to see how much they're jamming the GPS bandwidth.
Yeah, they're doing that. But what they don't actually, apparently don't do that much at all, but either because almost all these devices now have pretty much every satellite system in them in some level. So basically, if you can't block them all, it's kind of pointless because you go, oh, no, I'll just use this other one instead. And it works good enough. That I thought that was really interesting.
We're kind of giving the reason why it's not good from the military perspective, which of course is where all these things began. But really, we're using them so much more for economic and, well, especially economic purposes nowadays that having different systems just makes our economics a little bit more difficult because we have to make sure those systems are then synced to make sure our stock trades and everything else are going down to the millisecond between different countries. So it's kind of weird.
Yes, but there's the dilemma, right? The whole global government and global cooperation dilemma is that somebody has to pay for it, and when you pay for it, your own interests get ahead of others, right? Because it's incredibly expensive. And so, I mean, there's just a lot of practical things too, as well as vision-related things. But we can still hope that we can still hope for it.
Well, I think it's ultimately maybe never in our lifetimes, but hopefully be something a little bit like the kilometer or the meter. Is that there's just one standard and it's somewhere existed.
You understand that you just broke the whole conversation by adding that in.
I know, I did. But I'm just saying, sometimes having a standard is.
Next up is a cool program through Landsat and some of its scientists and involved in outreach, and it's called the STELLA program. And so this is an ongoing program, but they had a nice little write-up about it. And STELLA actually stands for Science and Technology Education for Land Life Assessment. And what it is a do-it-yourself spectrometer program. So not only the instruments themselves, and talk a little bit about how that came about, but also I think on GitHub there's instructions and code and stuff for creating your own. But it's really cool, right? Because one of the things that's often the hardest is, you could see the results of the great science that's done with remote sensing and other technologies, right? And how it helps the planet. But sometimes it's hard to kind of just say, well, this is how it works, right? And this is why we need to support it. And this is what's going on. So the goal of STELLA is to put an actual DIY spectrometer. So that's the instrument, right, that measures wavelengths of light reflected or emitted off of objects, and kind of show people how it works. And the great thing about this program is that the instruments themselves were built by 2 high school interns as part of the STEM Open Gateway. So again, NASA is just amazing at their educational and outreach efforts and how they can do that. And by the way, 2 high school kids, and I'm just like, my goodness, just some amazing work. And so the students were involved in actually building, I think it's 40 STELLA instruments. So 40 handheld DIY spectrometers, and then, doing some testing, learning what that means, learning about calibration, and, themselves seeing how they work. And then the actual instruments can be loaned out and have been loaned out to different educational institutions, as well as all the other cool stuff going on. So anyway, a great program, and, just another example of how marrying that low-tech approach to how the science works can always help, understand the more complex things that are going on to better understand our Earth.
I do question your definition of low-tech. Just because it's DIY doesn't mean it's low-tech, but, it's less expensive.
Well, the instruments are not $1 million instruments.
Yes.
They're things that I think they said that you could build for a couple $100.
Yeah, but that, again, I would not say it by any means that a Raspberry Pi is low-tech. And you can buy one off the shelf for like $50, right?
Compared to the computers that have to be housed in something that will survive in the vacuum of space, I think that's kind of what fine, it's not low tech.
But it's awesome. I mean, DIY is an amazing thing, and it can do a lot. I mean, we can do a lot with off the shelf components and putting them together nowadays.
So, and if you're an educator who might be interested in this, you can check out the article link in the show notes on info as to how to go about it, either getting one loaned to you or building your own. Next up in the news, the venerable GRASS GIS is going to get a modern overhaul thanks to a new NSF grant, which is part of the Pathways to Enable Open Source Ecosystems, the POSE program. So it's a $1.5 million grant over 2 years, headed by researchers at the Center for Geospatial Analytics at North Carolina State University. I think they've got a couple other co-PI and project leads as well. And it just, I saw this and I was like, GRASS GIS, haven't used it in years, but it was the first GIS I ever used back in the day. And so it's always out there. It's been involved in projects where, people have done a lot of cool things with it. And I just kind of haven't kept up. So this is great to see that what they're looking for is, a chance to, modernize a lot of code behind it, some of the models and things that are part of the collective community, and just, help raise it back up, I guess, as an option.
Well, I mean, it's embedded in, if you choose, of course, whenever you install QGIS, GRASS is kind of considered that raster portion of QGIS. And there's other extensions, of course, through QGIS that you can use, but this is one of those that that's one, I think, where most people intersect with GRASS is through QGIS, but it's still a great standalone product as well. If you're doing 3D, if you're doing raster, it's kind of the go-to in many ways, especially for the open source portions of the discipline. There we go, discipline.
Do you know what GRASS stands for?
I have forgotten.
At one point I did, yes.
Yeah, so here's something that's really weird, because I was curious about that. What's GRASS stand for? And you go to GRASS's webpage, and you go to About, and you go to History. It doesn't say.
No, I think that'd be a Wikipedia page type of thing.
Yeah, but it's just kind of funny that even on their own GRASS webpage, they don't tell you what GRASS stands for. We know it's going to be an acronym for something, in geographic raster analysis, something, I'm guessing. Something system.
Geographic Resources Analysis Support System.
Support system. And I said raster, but resources, I wasn't off that much. I was only off by half.
I mean, you have to think of it. It has to be something that would be military way of saying something.
Yeah.
So support system makes sense.
Corps of Engineers, those origins. But it's interesting because my first exposure, I was actually using what was then, not as often utilized, the vector tools in GRASS when I first used it. So
last this week, Esri's next MOOC, or one of the upcoming MOOCs at least, is GIS for Climate Action. And this is going to be led by a number of people, including, of course, the chief scientist, Dawn Wright. And it's like all the MOOCs, it's 6 weeks. So you put a couple or 3 hours a week in, and you can basically get a sense of how their tools, and generally it leans more towards pro and online, can be used for a certain area. So I just had a class utilizing the spatial data science MOOC, so they could see how some of the more detailed things I wouldn't necessarily go into in a class work out. This, of course, with climate action, will contextualize that. And there's a number of MOOCs that they provide throughout the year.
So yes, if you're interested, it actually starts on the 25th. It goes through the beginning of December, and you don't have to register right away. So if you don't listen to the podcast until a few days after that, you can register all the way up to November 9th, I think it is, to get started. And often they repeat these. So
yeah, but it's like once a year, once every year.
Yeah, so it's not as often as it used to be.
And if you don't have the software, if you're worried about that, you don't have access to it, you get it for free when you're part of the MOOC. So that's kind of cool. You get the student edition. So don't worry about whether you have a license or not.
Yeah, and one of the great advantages of a lot of these classes like this is the chance to work with data sets that you might not have access to in any other way, or to look at specific problems to be solved that maybe you might not have thought of or wouldn't have had exposure to. But it's like, wait a minute, I now see how this works. And, that can be inspiration for other things like working with your own data and stuff. So I think a lot of these are really valuable for that.
That's it for the news.
All right. This week, the last 2 weeks, I spent a surprisingly large amount of time, given my new position at work, making maps, oddly enough. And as one does when one uses GIS software, I said a lot of words that you're not supposed to say at work. Luckily, my office door closes. And so it got me thinking about the stuff that annoys me / wishes GIS would do as an interesting topic for us to talk about. And I think this can run the gambit from completely philosophical, broad things to little petty things that a specific piece of software does. So I'm going to leave it open in this conversation and see where it goes, see where it takes us. I got to say this. I had access to ArcPro and I was using Art Pro, and I really, 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 really hate legends in Art Pro, the way they work. They just seem, I understand, having done this for a while, I understand how we got there, but they just seem way more of a pain in the neck than they really need to be.
In comparison to the way it used to, or just in general?
No, this is my problem, is that not in this is one of the issues I have with GIS software, is it tends to think about itself in comparison to other GIS software or the history of the GIS software, and completely forget there's dozens and dozens of softwares out there that do all sorts of things that are not radically different, and they just do it better. I think that literally there should be an entire division of Esri whose entire job is to look at Adobe's suite of tools and steal as much good ideas as they can from it. That's just free advice. And Legends are a great example of it, is that this is way more complicated than it needs to be. I don't know why I can't go into the Legend and type my labels. Just type them. Let me type it. Make me go through and edit the data, the variables in the attribute table to get it to look right. Don't make me go through and edit the labels on the different classifications to make those work specifically, because God help you if you change it for some reason, then you got to retype all that junk. It just drives me crazy.
So my response to this is one that is very old. And I do it a little bit less nowadays, but it is rare that I don't explode the legend once I have it the map roughly done, and just start going through and editing it just right there, instead of, like you're saying, going through and editing some of these things in the ArcGIS Pro. I just break it out so they're just graphics at that point, and start editing them. Start basically editing the graphics and text. I do it a little bit less now because you did get more control, more finesse with the Legend in Pro, but there are still a good number of times where I just explode it out to graphics and start editing it.
Well, but part of that too, right, is the thinking about the philosophy, right, is that trying to make sure it stays connected to data for accuracy, right? You can see it as an important thing, but I will say in this too, when I have advanced students, I will have students that will, if they don't understand how to do the graphic thing, will attempt to actually export it and work with it in another program that is graphic design based to get what they want. Because they all, so also not understanding the difference between, right, the graphic product, the cartography product as a graphic, and that connection to the GIS data in the database and that real-time updating, to make sure that there's, so I think it's an interesting frustration, but also you can see, kind of the reasoning and how the development evolution. But yes, Frank, you're absolutely right, in terms of graphics and the visual, there are many, many more, what's the word I want, approachable or easier in the workflow ways to get that done. But get it done also to a visual standard that those who are focused on that will want, right? Or, or what we want too. I find, the one thing I find in there that it's super annoying weirdly is font editing sometimes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And I will have weird stuff happen and just no, I just want this font. This is the font I want.
And that's why sometimes I just break it out to graphics.
And that's what happens, right? Then you break it out to graphics, but at that point you've broken the connection. And so you are dealing with it as a visual product. So then why not at that point? Yeah. So yeah, that's it. It's interesting, but absolutely right.
I kind of feel like there needs to be a third stage to this, right? So you're doing your map, right? And that's a lot of the geospatial analysis, the data manipulation, putting things on there, all that sort of stuff. And then the next stage is a layout. I get that. And I can sort of see how you're starting to piece these things together, and then you may have to go back and rework your analysis or all that sort of stuff like that. I kind of like there needs to be a third stage where it's like, okay, I'm ready to print now. So could you just give me normal editing tools and just stop getting in the way so I can just edit this stupid thing? Like the font thing bugged me. The other one that bugged me a lot was, why, on what planet does it make any sense to have a border that has zero spacing between the legend elements and the border? And that seems to be the default place. So you always have to go through on legend and you have to say, okay, move it out and 0.2 points, in the X and Y direction. So you get, white space around what's in the legend and the border for the legend. Why? Why?
Somebody thought that was the best way to go at
Yeah.
the beginning because they didn't think that you were going to put a line. You were just going to let it bleed into the map background, I guess. But that also means that if you put a background on your legend, that it can do really weird things as well based on that box, even if you don't put the box in. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that was another one that pet peeve of mine. I was like, why not make it so it's got a little bit of space, and if somebody doesn't want that bit of space, let them change it. It's because I can't think of any scenarios where you would have.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of them. I kind of wish in this case, so this would be my wish for this, is that, the way it's done now is like you can, have your open layout tab or, kind of like you can have map scene and layout. But I think that layout, it would be great if there was an optional layout module that you basically send your map out and it's a whole separate module that's not tied into. So,
well, they really kind of, they tried to get away from that.
I know they tried to get away from it, but sometimes I think in the case of the production thing
but I think it's called Adobe Illustrator.
Yeah, well,
and
see, this is it, right?
That you can still export too.
Yeah, and a lot of people still do it, right? For that quality of map, but also just in general, that sometimes at the end of the day you have to adjust. And earlier on, actually, I wouldn't like to do that. I just wanted it to be connected, and I just want to say, no, I want the live stuff and all that. But as I've started to work in other 3D things where I understand that sometimes you just have to edit things, I'm much more understanding and open going, because I used to get really frustrated when I get students that would try to do that, say, no, it's just not working right, so I'm going to take it out in this other, like, I would just get frustrated. But now I'm like, you know what, I get it, because sometimes you just have to do it. And not every piece of software has to do every single thing, but yeah, I mean, it is kind of this is a good one to start with, Frank, because it really is. It's little frustrations. I just had to deal with it, and just tiny things too, like trying to click on the title box and couldn't get the font to edit so that you could have a large title and a subtitle that was a slightly smaller font. And it had to do with an exercise a student was doing, and they're like, "Why won't this work like this?" I'm like, "I don't know." And so finally figured out what it was. You had to actually click twice and do something to the box to get it to recognize that particular set of changes. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it, but it was a very specific example, but it's like, why?
Yeah, just little annoying things. Here's another thing that annoys me. On the right-hand side in the catalog pane, the tools pane, the history pane, the geoprocessing pane, the symbology pane.
The thing that has lots of tabs. Yes, we get it.
Yeah, it's just like, good God, people. It's like at some point you're doing things, you're going, oh, I can't read any of these tabs. I have so I have to drag it and cover almost all my map to go, oh, okay, this is where this is at. It's a little annoying. I get why it's there. I don't have a good solution. It's just that box.
Occasionally close a tab.
Well,
yeah.
You get, for me at least, you're not wrong, but for me at least, I get into a workflow, or I'm exploring a workflow. What if I do? What if I change this? What if I did? Okay, wait a minute. If I can edit this here, I'm doing that stuff, and I'm busy thinking through a problem, trying to solve a problem, and I notice I got like 9 tabs open. And I'm like, okay. It's just a little annoying. I don't have a good solution, but I kind of feel like maybe if the tabs were vertical instead of horizontal, that would be a little.
I can't remember how to do it. But
it's the thing is,
you can rotate them so they're on the right side instead of at the bottom.
Yeah, because the bottom makes it tough. But this is interesting too with any kind of expert software, and I think I'll be fair on this one, right? When you're training to use, like, I don't know, something like 3D Studio Max or Blender or any of those softwares that have to have lots of tool sets and lots of different dialogues and commands in a single user interface, it really is hard to try to figure out how to allow, as you're saying, a workflow that might be switching between them. But I will also say having the labels for them by default on the bottom is tough, because in especially new users, that they don't even think to look at that. And then you're right, in an educational setting, that's probably a top 5 question. I don't understand where my contents pane is. Like, what do you mean you don't understand? It's right there. Or not contents pane, sorry, my catalog pane. What do you mean? It's right there. And they go, what? And he's like, look, see your tabs, just click on it. And but it doesn't compute, literally.
Because the tab is supposed to be at the top, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean...
Well, on top of that, visually speaking, we know this in the West, at least. I'm not 100% certain this is true in all cultures, but in the Western, the upper left is where you start. The lower right is the last place you look. So we move from upper left corner, and we move across and down, like we're reading a book. So visually, we're always going to catch the upper left first, and then the upper right second, and then the lower right is going to be the absolute last place we ever look, ever. So it's not a big surprise. But I it's good to know you can change that, but it's a little annoying that you forget how, because it's just not, a lot of times it's just easier to adapt to the annoying way than to make it work the way you want it to work. And that's.
And a favorite tip too, by the way, is up at the top in the ribbon. If your contents pane goes away, your table of contents, just as in the old days, it could happen in the older GIS interface, right? There's a button up there that will put it back. Just FYI. Because that's also, I think, top 5 questions, right? Where's my thing on the right? What happened to my contents?
Or catalog.
Yeah, so either pane, right? And again, this is tough, right? How to cram all the stuff in while still maintaining a window that's large enough to work in. And so it's a huge frustration, but there are ways to get those things back. And if you need to, there's a default view that you can go back to. But those are if you're helping people, those are common questions that come up. Just usually, where is stuff? And I click something and it went away. But I think that they're just user interface dilemmas that a lot of the software has. And so I think that I have across the board pet peeves, but I'm not really sure, like you say, Frank, like what's the solution to some of these, but they are headaches in working with stuff.
I'm fully sympathetic to the general notion that Esri could make ArcGIS Map Pro, because, they're fond of reusing names all the time, and make a whole new interface. And the people who have been doing GIS professionally for, in many cases, decades, would just flip out. I mean, it was a hard enough get to move over to Arc Pro from Arc Map, which was quite different, but I wouldn't say, completely radically different. So even if they do things that are just really out of the norm, it's hard to keep their customers on board with that. So I'm very sympathetic to that fact, but there are some baffling things that have happened over the years that I just don't understand. Another one that bugs me is the what I believe is the over reliance on the right click. Particularly on layers, there's a bazillion things in there, and they seem somewhat random and bizarrely organized. And so that I find more often than not, when I right click, I have to actually read the list and go, wait a minute, where the hell was that again? I kind of got where the attribute table is. It's in the top third. Okay, it's somewhere up there, so I don't have to look at the bottom. But there's some things like one of the things I was doing I was plotting student addresses on a map for some analysis we're doing, and so I basically have a bunch of lat long pairs, and so I'm just bringing that in as a CSV file, and I just need to convert it to an XY plot, and that's in that right click menu, but it's like down in the bottom half somewhere. It's just finding that is a little more work than it needs to be, because there's so much in there.
One, I am a huge fan of the contextual menu, so I understand but can't really get behind this one. But it brings up a slightly tangential. There might be a need to just create a simplified interface version, because there's no reason not to, right? They have all source. They have, I think there's a couple other ones that I can't remember the top of my head, but they're all basically ArcGIS Pro with different skins. So it wouldn't hurt us to have kind of the beginner level skin, and then the intermediate level skin, and then the advanced skin, and we could turn things on and off as we wanted to. And this is something that you do in Premiere or Photoshop. You change the interface to provide you the tools that you need for that context. And I think, they could pretty easily do that. Thoughts on that one?
Well, no, I would agree. And I mean, you could tailor tutorials. I mean, it would take some work, say, and I think in enterprise situation and in an educational situation, right, that would be super useful, because then you could tailor what is seen. And, I mean, if you use standardized lessons and things like that, maybe you would run into a little bit of a problem. But I think that would allow, because here's increasingly what I think, and I'll see what you guys think on this, is the problem in the educational setting for some of these things is more and more students that are coming in, and I would say maybe are in the professional world too, are not familiar with Windows.
Well, then the argument that they're going to provide at Esri is going to be that you need to move to the modern GIS.
That's fair enough, but
no, it's not. But
That's fair enough that would be the argument. I'm not saying I agree, disagree, whatever with that. But where the power is, right, is still right now in Windows. And so context menus, right-clicking and stuff, those are Windows things. And I do find that students struggle with that. And so having a simplified way to kind of ease into some of those things. But yes, that's true. And I can still remember when I first started using 3D Studio Max, right? It came with a cube, a paper cardboard cube that you would fold into the cube shape that had commands for each of the menus that were the most commonly used, right? And you could flip the cube around on all its sides, and that was it. You didn't have them all turned on at once, right? But you could say, all right, if I need to do this, but that's how complex it was. And this is similar, right? Just lots of tools, lots of dialog boxes, lots of things that potentially need to be open depending on the scenario. And so in trying to pack all that in, right, it's not intuitive, right? So that's another thing I think you would agree, Frank, is right, is when I don't know where something is and I could search or whatever, but if I want to do it quickly, right, it's not necessarily where I think it should be. The only consistency is if I right-click on a layer, properties is at the bottom, right? And the rest of it, you're right, attribute tables near the top. And so some of the rest of it, I just kind of have to go, all right, let's figure out where this is, right? And, export data is near the bottom. But I do think that maybe the idea of the customized user interface UI to some extent, which has been, as you've given some examples, Jesse, really, really valuable in some other settings. I think that might be something. And I think that you could argue sort of the ArcView, ArcMap kind of thing was not really the same as that in the sense because it was different tool sets and things based on a licensing level, but this would be based on a use level. And so all source is a way to start getting at that. But I think that there could be more use there. And I think it also fits into the quote modern because, right, our idea is get apps and app skins that pull in different things that we're going to use and not use. So, I mean, we're already kind of in that curation mindset anyway.
So speaking of modern GIS, there's another one that I think most of us can get around behind as a pushing back a little bit and saying, well, I don't know about that. One of the challenges I find with the modern GIS is that, and this podcast is incredibly helpful for me, I don't know about listeners, but for me to try to sort through some of this stuff, is you kind of have to know all the things that Esri makes and what they can do. And then you can start thinking about, well, I need to do this bit of analysis. It's kind of like knowing every block that Lego makes and start thinking about how you could use that to build whatever you want to build, right? And so many of these products are coming out all the time and they do slightly different things. And the way they do them is oftentimes radically different. So you've got to kind of have this expert knowledge out of the gate before you even know, or I should say a second layer of expert knowledge about the specifics of Esri software on top of the general knowledge of GIS and GIS capabilities. And that's just, it seems a bit, particularly with the amount that slope is shifting, to be, it's a challenge for me. And it's no better in the open source world either, right? Because we just talked about earlier how QGIS includes GRASS and this and that, stuff like that. It's sort of the same thing. You got to kind of know what those things do and how they do them a little bit to understand what you could do, how many tools you have available to you. The one that is giving me those fits is I've been using, is it ArcGIS Insights or just Arc Insights? I can't remember what the exact name, but it's Insights. I've been using it and ArcGIS Pro to do some things to sort of make an argument for where our institution should be moving. But Insights doesn't act anything like Pro, really.
No.
So it's kind of like, okay, wait a minute, how do you do this here? And what can this do? Oh, that's pretty powerful. Now can I add it? No, I can't do that. Okay, now I need to export all the junk to Pro so I can do this, but I can't get it all out. It's just it's a bit maddening in the modern GIS. The interoperability isn't quite there, and the way you do things is radically different. So you go, okay, wait a minute, how do I do this here? And what if I want to stick a barfel on there? Oh, I can't do that in this software. I got to do it in this other software. It's a little frustrating.
And I don't know. There are many things to say about modern GIS. That there are positives. I love the ability to just have someone grab their phone and go out and do low-level data capture, grab an external GPS receiver and do high-level data collection, being able to use Survey 123, being able to use Dashboard or Insights to convey information. but just going to the waffle menu? Yeah, the waffle menu, and this avalanche of options falling down.
Have you ever gone to the waffle menu and ever not gone, wait, what the hell does that do? It feels like every time I go there, I look at something and go, I don't know exactly what that does.
After about a month, I'm used to what's there. And then, 2 months later, you get the next update. Then there's something there again. Yeah. And then you're like, wait, that was in my menu. Where's my license? So then you got to go turn a license back on that somehow got turned off.
Yeah.
And you're like, and that's because you do have administrative privileges. What about all those other people who don't, that may have been using that and just think it's gone now? So you're just like, okay.
Yes, that's a whole other set of issues. But
and let's not, forget the whole, we're going away from license managers to named servers. And that's not so much an Esri issue as having to train the IT departments to not expect a license manager in the future and get them to get on board with named users, which they don't necessarily want to give up the control over licensing on campus to some extent. And so,
well, you also get an associated problem where if you use single sign-on, right?
Which I keep forgetting to set up.
Right. If you use single sign-on, which is what Esri wants you to use, particularly if you're using Active Directory or Azure or something like that, so just use this, it works better. And then when you contact that team and you go, hey, we just should use this, it works better. They go, okay, tell me everything you know about the software and what the liability is and how it's not a security risk, and then blah, 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 blah. And you're like, okay, wait a minute, you have no basis to understand GIS. How do I get you to buy into this is good and it's not bad?
Yeah. Without,
having a series of meetings over and over and over again to do this educational thing. And it's just, ask me how I know. It can be very frustrating to do that because, it makes sense from Esri's standpoint to mesh this in the greater ecosystem. And it makes sense from the greater ecosystem standpoint. But the people who are in charge of the greater ecosystem, this is just some weird thing out there that, the small group of people do. I'm not comfortable with it because I don't understand it and I don't own it and I don't control it.
Yeah.
The nice thing about a license manager is I know exactly what that is. It sits over here and I can firewall it and I know what's going to happen. It's not a problem. So that's why they're happier with that.
I don't know, whatever their annoyances.
I'm continuously annoyed, and we're knocking on Esri a lot, but that's okay. They're the big boys. I'm continuously annoyed with the naming thing. My true pet peeve is Survey 123, because we're in the spatial world and survey means something. Okay. It means a very specific thing. And I know they mean the other definition of the word survey, but you say it in the wrong word. We'll just use Survey 123. 7 people in the back of the room are going to melt down, and for, if it's what they think it is, very good reasons, but it's not that. We're not doing legal surveys with this stuff. This is a different type of survey.
This is bringing into the issue the legal distinction between PLS and other surveyors. So licensed surveyors versus just using this word survey as referencing geographic data, which is qualitative data in that context. So, yeah.
It just feels like pick another name, man. It avoids a whole lot of headaches. Am I the only one with the annoyances about GIS? I've been throwing them out here. I feel like I'm knocking.
No, I mean, again, a lot of mine are just that we work in a particular field where, the educational field, where things I think that wouldn't be troublesome out in other industries and stuff. I mean, probably. So some of them I think fair.
Well, I mean, we could talk about, QGIS and the, I was talking about the avalanche of things in ArcGIS Online, but, we easily have an avalanche of extensions, and that's awesome. But it's just, trying to go through every extension that might have something to do with what I want to do is, and then they're not always well described, and then they're different implementations because they were written for different versions of
there does
QGIS.
Not exist a good, and here's where, right, we get down to the whole education in something like GIS, right? The concepts and the application of the concepts and methods versus how you actually do it, right? Because you have two very time-consuming approaches there. And what we don't have is, even in something like a help for any, I think, GIS and complex software, again, so I'm going to put other ones in that, right, is that it's very rare to have, say, a help or something. It says, what do you need to do? And to group, other than rudimentarily, group tools together in, or example workflows. You got to work really hard to get to that. And so that bewildering array of things that you can do as a result of people having to do them, who have expertise, right, and who already know how to get to that point. And they say, well, this tool needs to be in here. But it is very, very difficult to kind of get to the point when, and you said it earlier, Frank, right, that you have to know a lot about GIS to do all of these things. And so where's that going to come in? And that's I think, a huge thing that we think about as educators is how do you teach people the concepts in such a way that they can ask the right questions. And so in moving around in the GIS on the technical side, it is often very difficult. And you see people, kind of struggling, like they don't even begin to know where to find something. And it might not even necessarily be a heavy duty analysis or whatever. It might just be, look, I need to make this change to this current data set. And I don't even know how to do that. Right. Like it might even be something like filtering, and it's like 9 steps through dialog boxes to get to it. And, that's both on, say even online or on a desktop. But I think that would be something to see, is because things like documentation help, right? There's stuff that we do and we have to do, but maybe we don't as actively, and maybe this is changing, right? Maybe it's me a little bit behind. We don't see that part of it as being actively integrated as much as it could with other conceptual sides of GIS, if that makes sense.
Well, the documentation side is always a problem for every software when you get down to it. So it's not entirely fair to knock just GIS, but I do find that there's a large, I'm going to use the word percentage portion. I don't, it feels like a big number of times that I'm looking for something and I have to think about, first of all, I have to Google what specific terminology GIS uses to do the thing, because I can think of lots of different words that say that. Once you get the right word, you look at the help and you read it and you're like, okay, I understand what that says, but I don't have a clue what the hell that means. And you read it over and over again. And it sort of feels a little bit like reading legal documents. You have to go, okay, this word, that word. Okay. Let me read that again. This word, you do a lot of that to try to, particularly when it comes to parameters, trying to decipher what the heck does that mean and what's this going to do. And I find that more often than not, I fall back on, oh no, change it. I don't know, change it. I don't know, change that. I didn't look right. Don't change that. I didn't look right. And there's somebody who would come along and say, well, what analysis are you doing? Well, I could throw in the words that were in the help. And if you don't know GIS, you go, well, that sounds smart. You must know what he's talking about. And if you do know GIS, I suspect half of us are going, I don't know what that means either. And the other half are going, that's not the right analysis. So that, the documentation is very hard. And I feel like there needs to be a step. And this is true of open source as just as much as the commercial software, without a doubt. I feel like sometimes there needs to be somebody out there that reads this, that's semi-knowledgeable, and say, could you read this and explain to me what it means? And then if they can't do it, you go, okay, I need to rewrite my documentation. It's like a proper editor for some of this stuff, because particularly the parameters, I oftentimes don't understand what does that mean. And then I find myself going down a Googling rabbit hole and ending up in, professional papers where somebody who's invented this technique, and I'm reading the methodology and all this stuff. I go, oh, okay. I don't want to do that. That's a lot of waste of time,
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I'm going to throw in, we're not going to talk about today because we're already probably at the end, but for another time, right? I have just thought of one of my pet peeves, but again, I didn't think about it earlier because it's a general software pet peeve, and that is, please find some way to make your error messages make more, at least relate to something, right?
Something
So a
went wrong.
9999 error is not helpful for
Something went
fixing the
wrong.
problem. Yes. I get it. I'm there because I got the error, right? And I think a lot of this is changing. Again, it's across the board with software. But some of the errors, like the words, don't even make sense in the order in which they are in. And I just I wish I could remember the wording of it. I'm like, what does the error even mean? Right. So it's clear something's gone wrong, but these words are just like, it's like the 3-word addressing thing. It's like 5 words that are together. And I just literally I have no idea what this means.
Free tip for Esri. Put a link in all your error dialogues that say Google it. Like you just click on the link and it'll just Google that error number, because it's a pain in the neck to type in a number and like make a typo. And then you're like, I don't understand what that means. And you go check the number. You go, oh, I typed an 8 instead of a 9.
Yeah. And honestly, right, it's actually pretty well documented compared to other very complex pieces of software. So some of them are even, more obtuse. They just basically have like maybe half a dozen errors. And it's especially again in a situation where you now have a big community of users that are not experts necessarily, technologically speaking. When they get any error, it's a freak out. But then to have an error with just like bizarre, set of conditions or whatever, it's just like I don't even know what to do with this, right? I don't know how to troubleshoot this. This could be anything from the extensions turned off to you put in a data with a no data value or something, or I don't know, maybe my hardware is failing, right? You don't know, right? You can't even get the level of crisis that's involved.
So anyway, these are just some annoyances I experienced over the last couple of weeks that I wanted to talk about, but I thought it would be an interesting conversation. If you've got ones, you can always hit us up at the contact information that's coming up here in a minute.
Of course, if you'd like us to add your event to the podcast, is an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com.
I'm available at jesse@veryspatial.com, but of course at Kinda Spatial, and you can find all of our contact information over at veryspatial.com/contacts, and someday it may get updated.
As always, we're the folks from VerySpatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
City lights on summer nights, rose petal lips stained red, and I'm lost in a whirling blur in my head, moving slow and falling fast, falling fast. Spin me round and take my hand, hardly more than friends. Yeah. Blue-eyed baby, brown-eyed lady, let's see how this story ends.